Hey, welcome back to the Stash. It's the beginning of the Bronze Age. Comics were darker, more mature, and the battle of DC and Marvel was truly picking up some steam. But of course, throughout the decades, there were certain censorship rules in place, and in 1971, Marvel broke the rules. They didn't break the rules in a flashy or rebellious way. They broke the rules by telling the truth, by spreading awareness of one of society's biggest and most unforgiving problems, and in doing so, they published a comic that changed everything. The villain on the covers may have been the Green Goblin. He may have been the one physically fighting Spider-Man. But the actual main villain was something far more real, because in the Amazing Spider-Man issues 96 to 98, Harry Osborn, Peter Parker's best friend, falls victim to substances that no person should ever get hooked on. At the time, Marvel wasn't allowed to publish it. Not because the story was poorly written nor too violent, but because it showed something honest, because it talked about drugs, and the Comics Code Authority, the group that governed what could and couldn't be shown in mainstream comics, said no. But Marvel did it anyway. Stan Lee argued for it to be published, and even when their stubbornness persisted, he fought back with some of his own and made the comic anyway. But before we properly get into that, I want to take a quick second to say that here at The Stash, we're trying to reach 15,000 subscribers before the end of the month. It's a huge ask, I know, but with your help, I also know we can do it. So if you like Spider-Man or just comic content in general, feel free to stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button. But anyway, with all that being said, this is the story of the Spider-Man comic Marvel wasn't allowed to publish. So to understand why this comic mattered, you have to understand what comics were in the early 70s. They were still living in the shadow of the strict guidelines of the Comics Code Authority, this overseeing group that dictated what was and not allowed to be shown within comics, and they were created in the 1950s after a wave of public hysteria claimed comic books were corrupting America's youth. Naturally, the code banned a lot of things. It restricted violence, horror, and any story that questioned authority too directly. But one of their biggest guidelines was depictions of drug use, even in a clearly negative light. And for decades, that code shaped what comics were allowed to be. If your comic went out for the public to see and it didn't have that tiny stamp in the corner, it would mean you'd have a harder time selling it. But by 1971, creators were starting to push back. Writers and artists were exploring darker, more grounded stories. It was a new age, one that brought forth a plethora of innovative and capturing storytelling. The world was changing, and comics were trying to catch up. Just not fast enough. So when the US Department of Health, Education and Welfare approached Marvel and asked Stan Lee to publish a story warning about the dangers of drug addiction, Stan Lee agreed. He wrote a 3-part story, issues 96, 97 and 98 of The Amazing Spider-Man, where Harry Osborn becomes addicted to substances, with the overarching message being that these things affect everybody and not just one group of people. It wasn't glamorous nor cool, and that was the point. It was sad, painful, real. It had to be those things. It had to get people to listen, to truly listen to each and every word, to truly take in each and every panel. But when Marvel submitted the issues for the Comics Code approval, they were rejected. The code wouldn't allow any depiction of drugs, even one meant to save lives. And so, for the first time in Marvel's history, they published without the seal. It was a risk. A big one, but it was a risk Stan Lee and the team were willing to take, because telling the truth, even in a comic book, always mattered. The arc begins like any other Spider-Man story of the time. Peter is going about his life, doing the best he can. Mary Jane is preparing for her big night, and Norman Osborn is teetering on the edge of insanity once more. But behind the typical superhero setup, something's wrong. For deep within the streets of New York lies an addiction that's eating away at their society. But before the spotlight of this addiction shifts towards Harry, we see its unforgiving effects on a normal, ordinary man. He is lost within his own world, and if no one gets to him soon enough, then it would add another tally to the lives cut short from this wretched problem. But at that moment, he falls. Those below hold their breath, praying for a miracle, then suddenly, the Amazing Spider-Man swings by with perfect timing and grace, saving the man from his doom. And because of it, he'll live to see another day. But as I said before, this story shows that this problem affects everyone, and so the comic then shifts its focus to a certain Harry Osborn. Harry's fall isn't instant, but rather it unravels with each passing day. He goes from chugging sleeping pills to full-on buying things that will only leave your brain fried, and at the height of his problem in this story, he's heartbroken, aimless, and looking for something to numb the pain. Worst of all, when Peter checks back in on him, he finds Harry collapsed, drenched in sweat and delirious. But what makes this story so powerful is that it doesn't treat Harry's addiction like a plot device nor a subplot, because Harry's addiction is the emotional core. For the real danger is the slow collapse of someone Peter loves to this problem, this disease that can affect anyone. And for Norman Osborn, he sees his son in that horrifying state, which results in one of my favorite moments of the 70s for Spider-Man comics. The pure shock of seeing his boy lying broken in the hospital makes Norman forget about the Goblin once more. All the madness, all the hatred, it fades, because in that scene, we see him in real time transform from a menace to a father. A broken father, and it's Harry's suffering that brings him back. For Peter though, it's a harsh reminder that being Spider-Man is all about the people in your life, the ones who fall through the cracks, the ones you can't always save, because what Harry needed wasn't a superhero, it was his friend. When these issues hit the stands, they didn't carry the Comics Code Authority's stamp of approval, a first for Marvel Comics. For over 15 years, that little white seal had dictated what was acceptable in mainstream comics. It was born in fear, a response to the moral panic of the 1950s when comics were blamed for juvenile delinquency and publishers were forced to self-censor or risk government regulation. The seal, in many ways, was a warning system, a signal to parents, retailers, and distributors that the comic inside was clean, safe, and appropriate. Without it, your book might not get printed, it might not get shelved, it might not get sold, and yet, despite all of that, Marvel published the story anyway, without the stamp, without permission, and most importantly, without compromise. Because Stan Lee believed it was the right thing to do. He later even said, "We had to do it. If we hadn't done it, we would have been cowards. We would have been ignoring a very real problem just because some authority told us not to talk about it." This wasn't just about Spider-Man. This was about what comics could be and what they were allowed to be. The issue didn't glorify anything, and they certainly didn't encourage anything. They showed a man lost in his own world, almost losing his life because of it. They showed a friend, someone Peter loved, spiraling into what could have been, at the time, his own demise, and they treated that with honesty, empathy, and weight. Marvel here told an incredible story, one of my favorites for the time, but more importantly, they made a statement, one the industry couldn't ignore. Shortly after these issues were released, the Comics Code Authority revised its rules. For the first time, comics could depict drug use, as long as it was portrayed as harmful. That single revision marked a turning point, a sign that the walls were cracking, that stories could finally reflect the world outside their panels. Marvel had forced their hand. They'd pushed comics forward, and they did it not with a splash page or a supervillain twist, but with a quiet, painful story about a scared, broken friend. Today, the Amazing Spider-Man issues 96 to 98 are seen as groundbreaking. They help dismantle the Comic Code's authority's stranglehold on creativity. They help pave the way for more honest, mature stories, from Demon in a Bottle to Watchmen. But beyond the historical importance, this story still resonates because it feels real. Harry Osborn's pain in this carries weight through every page. It's the kind of pain that sneaks up on you, that breaks you from the inside out, and it was brought to life brilliantly by Gil Kane's pencils too. The images displayed in these 3 issues are some of the greatest comic panels of the 70s, ones that I personally will never forget. Lee and Kane brought this story to life, and in a medium built on spectacle, it's the quiet human suffering that cuts the deepest. Marvel wasn't supposed to publish this comic, but they did. They went to print without proper permission, without the Comics Code seal, without the safety net that every publisher was told they needed. Because sometimes, art is all about telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and even when it might cost you. And in telling the truth, in putting it on the stands for anyone to see, Marvel reminded us what comics are capable of. They reminded us that behind the costumes and action, behind the punches and the page turns, there are stories about people, about fear, about grief, about addiction, and about how easy it is to fall when no one's watching. They reminded us that comics in their purest form are reflections of who we are, who we want to be, and the people we sometimes fail to become. And that sometimes being a hero doesn't mean saving the day, it doesn't mean winning the fight. It means listening and caring enough to notice when someone close to you is slipping away. In 1971, Spider-Man couldn't stop Harry's pain, but Marvel made sure we saw it. They didn't shy away, they didn't look the other way. And that's real power, because real power is the courage to tell a story that matters, even when you're told not to.